Welcome to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. This is the podcast dedicated to people who want to speak more as a way to build their income and grow their business. Well, welcome everyone to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. I'm your host, Jane Atkinson, and having been in the speaking industry for over 30 years, I have the advantage of knowing some of the greatest stage performers of our industry. The Joe Callaways of the world, the Glenna Salisburys of the world. And today, we're going to be discussing the ultimate keynote. And I felt that the greatest person to talk to about this is Hall of Fame speaker Joel Weldon. Welcome to the podcast, Joel.
Well, thank you, Jane. Great to be with you and great to have you listening to Jane and I talk about how you can be an even better speaker.
Yes. And we have so many awesome tips for people to figure out kind of how to level up their game on the platform. But give me a little snippet. When was the first time you actually got paid to speak, Joel?
1974 to the Phoenix Independent Garage Owners meeting.
Independent Garage Owners Meeting. Yeah, there really is an association for everything, isn't there, Joel?
Well, not anymore because there's very few independent garage owners now.
Oh, right.
Self-service.
And so do you remember what your fee was?
Oh, I know exactly what it was.
What was it?
Well, the guy called me up and asked me to speak, and I said I would, and he said, we have to talk about money.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's okay. He said, how does $25 sound? And I said, well, that sounds great. Where do I send the check? And he said, no, you're going to get $25. I said, I get $25? He said, yes, and a chicken dinner. I said, really? He said, yes. And that was my first paid engagement.
Awesome. Not only were you one of the founding members of NSA, but you're also one of the founding members of the Rubber Chicken Circuit.
Yes.
That is why we actually call it the Rubber Chicken Circuit. All right. Well, you have coached thousands of speakers. What is one of the more common mistakes that you see speakers making on the platform? And you and I just talked about this, and I'm curious to see if this will be the number one that you come up with.
Well, in my opinion, watching well over 10,000 speakers, coaching them, critiquing them, I think the biggest mistake a speaker makes is performing, is trying to be somebody that they're not. The single most important quality that we have is our own uniqueness, our individuality. And what makes a great speaker, in my opinion, again, has nothing to do with speaking ability. It actually has to do with one word: results. When a speaker presents to an audience, what will the audience do? I mean, Jane, think how many times in your 30 plus years have you heard a great speaker, humor, dynamic, energy, fascinating, and you get out in the lobby and people say, boy, wasn't that great? And you say to them, yeah, what are you going to do? Oh, well, I don't know. And as an example, I just heard a speaker talk about cyber crimes, dull, boring, monotone, no humor, terrible slides, because I knew at least 15 people in that room that over the next week did so many things this guy said to do to protect yourself and your electronic devices. One thing I heard from every one of those 15 plus people was, before I go to bed, I shut off my laptop and phone. And that was his opening idea, that if you want to reduce cybercrime in your life, turn off your device when you go to bed. If you sleep 8 hours, that's 1/3 of a day. You have reduced your risk by 1/3 by just turning off your phone and computer. And people went, oh my God, that is so simple. Why didn't I think of that? And as a result, that person was a great speaker.
Not only are we giving you great tips on the ultimate keynote, but you're also getting a little dash of cybercrime and how to protect yourself. And so I love that we're providing that as well, Joel. I really like that you are talking in terms of results. What is it that people can walk away and do as a result? Now, let's hear your definition of a straight up motivational talk? Because you and I come from an era where it used to be someone could just stand on stage and be really, really motivating, and everybody would love it, and that was that, right? But everything kind of shifted back in 2008, and companies started to say, no, we need more results. We need to show our stakeholders that we're actually buying something worthwhile here. And so everything started to shift. What do you think? God, I can't even remember where I was going with that with that question anymore. I got myself down a squirrel hole.
Well, you were talking about motivational speakers.
Yeah. What is the difference between motivation and, like, what would you give me your characterization of that nowadays?
Well, let's look at the word motivation. If you break it up, it's motive for action. And motivation is strictly an inside job. I mean, Jane, nobody can motivate you. The example is when you hear a speaker, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Mm-hmm. But you can feed the horse salt, and the salt will make the horse drink. And the same thing with a speaker, whether you call him a motivational or an inspirational speaker, is motivation comes from within. A speaker can provide salt. A speaker can give an example, an analogy, a metaphor, a personal story that would inspire the audience to say, you know, I think I should do that. And if that occurs, then going back to my definition of what makes a great speaker, something will result. And as an example, I remember hearing a speaker over 40 years ago that said, always back your car in. And why would you do that? Because next time you get in your car, whether it's in your garage or your carport or in a parking spot in a restaurant or hotel or a shopping center, the minute you get back into your car, you're always heading towards your goal. So for over 40 years, since that day, I back my truck in or my wife's car every single time. That's motivation.
Yeah.
So it's not getting people to just feel I can do anything. You know, that's motivational hype. How can you do anything? Well, you need a goal. You need a plan. You need assistance. You need a mentor. You need a guide to help you. You need a plan. All of those things are so vital. And that's what I've seen, as you have seen, this change in the industry, is we're getting back to results. Now, there's a difference between entertaining and speaking. So when you go to hear a comedian at a comedy club, you're not looking for motivation. You're looking to be entertained. When you go to a movie, Jane, you want to see something that either makes you feel good or gets you thinking. That's entertainment. But the speakers I work with that use speaking to grow their business or position them as a thought leader and a results leader are not entertainers. And that's why when I see people performing, acting on stage, and then when you meet them afterwards, you think, oh my gosh, who's this person? They're so different than they were up there. And that congruency is the key. Is being who you are. And if you're dull and boring, then let's set that up in the beginning.
There's probably a good joke in there somewhere about at least the topic being dry and boring. And if when somebody can face that head on, that kind of takes the elephant out of the room, doesn't it? You know, anything that the audience might be thinking, don't you think should be said from the stage?
Absolutely. Well, I've written just in the last 5 years, probably 700 introductions for my clients and the groups that I work with and help facilitate their speaking training programs. And we always do that. One I just did, Kevin. Kevin is 6'7". He's a big man, but he's got big ideas for you. Why did we put 6'7"? Because the minute he stepped on stage, people would think, how tall is that guy? Or if it's an accent. Yes, Simon is from Ukraine. And English is his actually third language. So you're really going to have to pay attention to his Ukrainian accent. And if you only get half of what he says, you'll still be way ahead because Simon's got some great ideas. After the program, Simon said, once we started putting that in the introduction, people would say, I could understand everything you said. So it's setting up, not trying to be perfect, not trying to be different than who you are. Like me being old. I mean, I'm going to be 78 years old. I'm always the oldest person in the room. So right in the introduction, it says, Joel's been doing this for over 45 years. Matter of fact, I asked him, how old are you, Joel? And he told me, well, my social security number is 5. And then I have on the screen, my social security card goes on the screen and it's 0000005. Joel Weldon. And then, he even remembers when Baskins and Robbins had one flavor.
That's funny.
And Burger King was just a prince. So, he's older than everybody in this room, but he's got more energy than almost anybody in this. So the age factor goes away.
That's really, really intelligent because anything that you think the audience might be thinking, and by the way, I don't know if you mentioned it in your intro, but the fact that you're out doing skiing as much as you do, what kind of tell us about your skiing and your water skiing? That's my own personal curiosity here.
Oh, well, yes. I didn't even start slalom skiing till I was 50. And when I was 50, I learned to get up after 3 years on double skis to get up on one ski. And now my wife and I, we have a private water ski lake about an hour from our Scottsdale home where we have a second home for tournament skiing. And we ski probably between 75 and 90 days a year. And we also have a houseboat up at Lake Powell that we spend about 55 nights a year on. So competitive water skiing has been a big part of our background. And now I'm getting close to my 80s, and I still do that at least a couple of times every week now.
I love it. I love it. We were just having this conversation. My husband and I, he's 62 and I'm 55, and we just went skiing with our 2-year-old and 4-year-old grandkids. And it was the most magical thing. And it was the first time I had skied in 20 years. So now you're inspiring me. Back to epic keynotes, back to the ultimate keynote. So let's talk about speech prep. We know that we need to provide results. We know that we need to be authentically ourselves when we come out on stage. What do you do to prepare? And you just mentioned the introduction, which I think a lot of people don't give enough consideration to. What do you do in preparation?
Well, that's where everything happens, because the basic premise is it's all about the audience. Now, I know a lot of my speaker friends in the Hall of Fame that think it's about them, and they're superstars, and people want to hear what I have to say. I don't believe that, never have. Nobody cares about Joel Weldon. They only want to know, what does this guy know that can help me? So my preparation begins, and all the people that I coach and work with our ultimate speaking system, there's 5 steps to preparing any message. And this is the formula I've used for over 4 decades. Number 1, who is the audience? Now, I'm not just talking about, they're all lawyers. I just spoke for a 600-person law firm at the end of last year in Indianapolis, and the COO was my contact. And I said, so who's in the audience? They're all attorneys. Well, after a series of questions, actually, there were 6 audiences. There were partners and there were non-partners. There were newly hired attorneys and there were old-time attorneys. Now we got 4 groups. There were also younger attorneys and there were also senior attorneys. So actually, there were 6 different groups of attorneys that I had to have something in my keynote for to connect with. So that's the first process to think of. Who is in your audience and really the demographics? Since we're talking about speakers and the National Speakers Association, if you talk to a National Speakers Association local chapter, the program chairman might say, Jane, we'd love you to come in. They're all speakers. Well, that's not true. Some are Hall of Fame speakers like myself and your other guest. Some are CSPs. Some are just starting out as professional speakers. Some are candidates. Some are wannabe speakers and they just joined Toastmasters. So we might have 5 levels of speakers in a speaking audience. The second step is, what are their NFVs? Once we know who the audience is, what are their needs, fears, and victories? And if you want to have a killer keynote, if you want to be amazing in your audience's eyes, find out first, what does this audience need to be doing in the area that you're going to speak about that they're not doing now? Second word, fears. What worries them or concerns them that would be fear? What keeps them up at night? And the victories, what are their successes? What are their achievements? So as an example, my last meeting was in Nashville. I was talking to a company that provides automotive products to people that have these big retail stores like O'Reilly's and Pep Boys, and they supply them with everything possible that they buy in bulk and reduce them down to smaller sizes. So what were their needs? Well, they had merged 12 companies into one company over 2 years. They needed to be a more cohesive team. They needed to see the person next to them, not as the competitor that they had been fighting with for the last 10 years, but now a partner, because those two companies had merged together. What were their fears? So the amount of time I spend trying to figure out what are their needs, fears, and victories really helps you as a speaker. If you would do that, you would know more about that audience than the audience even knows about themselves.
Love it. And you can make the victories, you can make them the heroes of some of your stories by knowing what their victories are. You can pull that right out from the audience, right?
Absolutely. Well, in my typical keynote, I would have anywhere from 10 to 30 names on the screen of people sitting in the room. So if I was going to talk about longevity and being excited about what you're doing, I'd have Jane's picture up there. You know, Jane's been with us for 31 years. Matter of fact, she just took her grandkids skiing for the first time. And what she said was she loves this idea of the 12 companies being merged into one because now she has a better marketing department, better support department, better delivery department. So that's all been part of my process. And I've shared that on the main stage for years at NSA. And the comment I get back from speakers, well, that sounds like a lot of work. I just want to have a talk.
Yeah.
To me, that's the biggest mistake a speaker could make, is having a talk. Right. That's assuming you got the same audience with the same needs, the same fears, and the same victories, and it doesn't work. Now, that doesn't mean you need to create all new material. But I've never given, out of 3,000 paid talks, the same talk twice, ever, because I never had the same audience, and you shouldn't either.
What's your percentage of customization? So, 60% the same, 40% customized, something like that?
Well, it would appear so much more, but specifically, if we broke down every story, example, statistic, metaphor, analogy, and let's just say, in a keynote talk, there were 50 of those little pieces. Maybe 40 of them would be the same, but they would be tweaked. If I told a story, in the business we call it a signature story, it would have a completely different point each time based on those needs, fears, and victories.
Right.
And that's where the preparation goes. Now, I know what I'm going to say next is people are going to be disbelieving, but if you go back and watch NSA talks from the main stage that are in the library, I've said it before. It takes me about 50 hours to prepare for every presentation. And most of that time is in figuring out, what does the audience need? What are they afraid of? Reading everything that they've got in their newsletters. Talking to people on the phone. So if you were the head of your company, Jane, and you hired me, I would say, who are 3 people, Jane, on your team that really have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in Atkinson's enterprises? And then I would talk to those 3 people and ask those questions that would uncover the needs, fears, and victories. And when I called the second guy, I would check him out and say, hey, I understand that not getting the catalogs has been a real issue. And this really happened at this meeting in Nashville, which is a company called Weldon. And he said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, I heard that the catalogs are backordered. No, he said, we're getting plenty of catalogs. Okay, so now I got some conflicting information here. So then I would go back to Jane, and Jane, I said, are catalogs a problem with you people in the field? Well, yeah, our East Coast offices, really, we had a problem this year. The West Coast doing fine. Oh, okay. So I had one guy from the East, one from the West. So now when I talked about that at the meeting, and I used it in a humorous way, as an example of how you'd customize. So I talk about the challenges they face, and then I have a picture of the hotel soaps and shampoos. And I say, and the biggest challenge you're going to face is getting home with all the hotel soaps and shampoos you've been taken from the room. And then I hold up mine from the room. Everybody laughs. Then I would say, and some of your kids have never even seen a big bar of soap. I mean, that's why we come to meetings like this, right? Well, they're laughing. Then the next line would have a picture of their catalog on the screen. And I would say, of course, that's not as bad as the people on the West Coast not getting catalogs in time. So it's short, snappy. And then what does the audience say? This guy knows what's going on. If he knows what's going on with the catalogs, maybe the ideas that I'm going to hear are relevant to me. And that's what you need to think of as you're listening to this podcast. Is what you're saying relevant to the needs of your audience? Is it meeting a fear, helping them overcome that? Is it reinforcing a victory or success? So as an example, this meeting in Nashville, I gave all the statistics on how much they're just approaching $1 billion this year. What's going to that mean? What does that mean? Their 401k contribution is going to be going up. They're going to be getting a better healthcare program. They'll get faster deliveries on the catalogs. Boom. All of those little things take time. And why would you do this? Well, I mentioned the numbers. I mean, I've been paid over 3,000 events. We've never marketed Jane. We've never had a relationship with a speakers bureau. We've never had a demo video. We've never called a client. Two things happen. If you give the right message, they want to hire you again or will tell somebody else about you. I know that sounds so simplistic, but just think wherever you're living as you listen to this podcast, if there's a restaurant you love, you go back there. And when somebody comes in from out of town, you bring them to the restaurant. If they move into your town, they're going to go back to the restaurant. I know that sounds oversimplistic in this great age of marketing and all kinds of things that the internet lets us do, but it's the bottom line is when you speak, what does the audience do? Does the person who's writing you the check see your ideas are being implemented? And if they are, let's get them back again and give us more ideas. Third step is, I call it the golden thread. Now that you know your audience, now you know their needs, fears, and victories, in one sentence, what are you going to talk about? So if we were to summarize so far our roughly 24 minutes of talking, what has been the golden thread of our conversation? We're talking to Joel Weldon about what makes a great keynote speech and what makes a great speaker. And it's all about the audience. That's our one sentence. So if you would start in your preparation, audience, NFVs, one sentence, what am I going to talk about? Step 4 is, what do I want to have happen? What is the call to action? And I have right in front of me my call for action for your members, Jane, in listening to this podcast. And the call to action is, number 1, don't be anybody else but you. If there's anything that's distracting or limiting your progress, bring it up in the beginning, make fun of it, and take it away. But don't become a performer. Stay congruent to who you are. Number 2, it's all about your audience and it's not about you. No, you don't care about Joel Weldon. If you're still listening 25 minutes into this interview, it's because you're getting something to help you be a better speaker. So now we've got the first 4 steps: the audience, the NFVs, the golden thread, the call to action, and now you create your message. And unfortunately, this is where most speakers begin. They start with their message. Oh, this is my favorite story. And then they say that to the audience. Oh, this is my favorite story. You're going to love it. I feel like jumping up if I'm in the audience and saying, good, go to the bathroom and tell it to yourself. I don't care if it's your favorite story. So what the speaker should say is, of all the things you've learned at this 3-day event, this next story is going to be your favorite. Or if we're talking about a point on cybercrime, we mentioned that. Here are 3 things that you can do. This third idea is my favorite. No, this third idea is going to be your favorite because it's so simple for you to use. Count how many times you say I and how many times you say you.
What about when it comes to either writing down your presentation word for word or not? Where do you land on that, Joel?
Well, since my ultimate speaking system and the most of the time I'm spending now is coaching speakers, I don't use the word always and never, but this is kind of a never, in my opinion. I don't think you should never write a speech out.
Okay.
Because what happens is if you write out a speech word for word and craft it, and there are some speakers who do this. I'm not saying that there aren't people who do it, but it's rare. You have to be able to memorize that. I can't memorize anything. I've never tried to memorize anything. But if you want to write stuff down, you would write keywords, thoughts. So you told me about your experience going water skiing after all of these years. Okay, that's all you would need. Water ski last week.
Just bullet points.
Just a bullet point. Jane, you said you're in your 50s, right?
Correct.
Okay, I've got socks older than you. But,
and
okay,
shirts.
as a young
We're going to
girl,
talk about the shirts that you have that are older than me later.
but you have been talking for over 50, almost 50 years. You don't need a script. And the problem speakers have, all right, I'm going back to my script now. I'm trying to remember, what's that next word? The problem speakers, and that's what you see happen. Their mind is looking for that next word. So you never want to be thinking of what's next. You want to be thinking of what you're saying. You want to be present with every word you're saying. And then the power of PowerPoint slides become, that's your trigger point for the next idea. A simple way to, and if you don't use visuals, I always use notes, but I don't have a script. I would have, like the things we've talked about, what makes a great speaker? Results. So I would have on the notes, great speaker dash results. That's all we need. You asked me first talk, 1974, garage owners. All right, well, I don't have to think of what words would I use to structure that, because then I'm going to be thinking of a script instead of connecting to the audience. So that's what I've seen. The best speakers, yes, they have a talk or a story that could be very similar the way it's told. But if you have a script, how could you customize it to the needs, fears, and victories of that audience today if it's crafted word for word like you've always been doing it? And yet I remember the great Ira Hayes, who was one of our original founders, who has long since passed on. He had one talk, and he kept telling us at NSA conventions every year, it's much easier changing audiences than changing talk. And I always went in the other direction. My philosophy is find out what everybody else is doing and don't do it. Don't compete, create. If people have a standard talk, I knew then I would never have a standard talk.
Really, what we're reinforcing is a message that we've given on this podcast many times, is that there is no one perfect way to do everything. And I want you to talk about the ultimate system that you have. We're going to put a link to it in the show notes. And then before we move on from there, then I want to talk to you about shirts. Tell us about the ultimate system that you provide.
Well, based on all of these experiences over the years, so many times people would come to me and ask me to help at these corporate events other people in the company. So I started doing speech coaching, which I never thought I would do. And now it's turned out to be the biggest thing that I do. And now most of the speaking I do is about speaking. And not to professional speakers, but to business people about using speaking to grow their business. And I started out by just collecting all of these tweaks and tools. So let me give you an example of a tool. If I said to you, Jane, I can help you be a better speaker. Does that sound good?
I'm in.
Okay, which means you're probably terrible right now.
I hope
I can help you be a better speaker. How about this one? I can help you make more money. The reason I'm saying that is you're probably not doing very well financially. But now here's a tool out of the Ultimate Speaking System. Every time you say the word more or better, preface it with a 4-letter word, even. So now let me give you those two again.
Okay.
Jane, I can help you be an even better speaker.
Right.
Jane, the Ultimate Speaking System will help you earn even more money. The power of inserting even, and it changes the tone. It uplifts the audience. It edifies them. It makes them successful, but it shows them there's a better place to go. I'm here to help you have better teamwork, because obviously you're fighting like cats and dogs in this company.
Right.
But if I said to, and if you as a speaker said, and the reason that they invited me here is so that you can have even better teamwork as you move into the second quarter of this year. The power. Now that's a twist. So I've created a toolbox of all of these tools. There's 55 tools in the system. And I started out 5 years ago when I created this toolbox with one video. Now we've got about 175 videos. And anybody who invests in the system, and I have a lot of Hall of Fame speakers that use this system, it's a one-time investment. So everything new that I create, our members keep getting. So people who invested 5 years ago with one video now have over 170, and they never paid another penny. So it's a one-time, lifetime investment, no monthly fee. It's one time. It's $19.97, and for the groups that I work with in the speaking profession, like for our NSA chapters, we take off the one, and it's $9.97. And if anybody's interested, just send me an email, and I'll send you some examples, and we can talk about it if it's helpful for you. I don't want to turn this into a commercial, but the feedback I've gotten has really been part of my legacy. I never imagined that all of these tools could be so life-changing for people who have already been doing it. And Chad Hymas in the Hall of Fame is one of my raving fans. And also in the system, I have interviews with 16 Hall of Famers on exacting out of them their secret sauce. And these videos are available nowhere else but in the Ultimate Speaking System. And so I've got videos, audios. It's a huge online program.
Beautiful.
And okay.
Beautiful. And at $9.99, I mean, that is a no-brainer, everybody. So is it joel@joelweldon.com?
No, the best thing, just email me at joelweldonspeaker@gmail.
Okay.
Just say, I'm part of Jane's group. I'm part of Jane's group. What's this Ultimate Speaking System?
All right. Very good.
And we'll make it simple.
And my coach, Dan Sullivan, highly recommends you as well. And
yes, Dan is one of my raving fans. I got his video on my website. Actually, what he said, and it's printed right on the front of our material, I learned more from Joel Weldon's Ultimate Speaking System than anything I have in 40 years of speaking.
Beautiful.
So a lot of my members are part of Coach. So I'm glad you're part of Dan's group.
I am. And he probably met you through Joe Polish at the Genius Network, and there was a story. You sent me a link to a story which I'd like to assign everyone, because this is idea of being memorable can be our final point of today's podcast, how to be memorable. And I would like to assign everyone a piece of homework, which will be to watch your presentation that you did at the Genius Network. I don't remember how long it was, Joel.
It's 10 minutes. It's a 10-minute talk.
A 10-minute talk, and it's got at the end a surprise to it that we cannot spoil. I do not want to give you a spoiler because you're not going to appreciate that. And but I do want you to recognize that this is the way to become memorable. What else do you want to say about this particular? It's about shirts, which we already discussed. Your shirts, some of them are.
Well, no, it's really about problems. It's really about how to solve your problems. And if you're not familiar with Genius Network, I mentioned about speakers. Joe Polish, who's the founder of Genius Network, he recently spoke at an NSA chapter meeting, and I introduced him. And if you're a Toastmaster, he's got more ums and uhs than anybody else. He goes off on tangents. He doesn't finish his stories. By the way, his speaking fee is $50,000 for
exactly.
And he runs a coaching group that I'm part of, and I've been paying him $25,000 a year to be part of the Genius Network. So I've cut him $125,000 in checks, the best money I've ever spent, and that's how I've learned how to do so many more things with this ultimate speaking system. But at the annual event, for people to understand, we had 400 people. I've emceed it for the last 5 years, and I speak at the event as well. And this last one that Jane's going to give you the link to the video is one of our 10-minute talks. We had 26 speakers, and it's a small group, 400 people. Tony Robbins has been part of it, Arianna Huffington, some big-name people are all part of Joe's group. And this talk is about problems and challenges and how to overcome them. And we have 10-minute talks at this event, and they paid $10,000 for 2 days to hear. Last year we had 27 speakers. So you're going to hear this 10-minute talk, and it's important as you watch it to see the power of visuals, the power of a story, and how it's customized to people that are part of this group. So the names of the people you'll hear in my talk, you don't know who they are, but people in the room knew who they were because they all had spoken at that event. So that's a good assignment for them, Jane, to see, does this guy practice what he preaches?
It's so fun at the end, and I want to talk to you about it, but I can't. So we're not going to spoil it for anybody. So with that, I will say, Joel Weldon, thank you so much for taking the time out. We're actually recording this on Memorial Day, where I'm pretty sure you're due at a barbecue at some point here in time. And I just want to tell you, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
Well, one last word. As you listen to this, as a member of Jane's group, remember, it's all about your audience. It's not about you. And on page 148 of the Ultimate Speaking System, I summarize everything it's taken over 4.5 decades to learn in 22 words. So here are the closing 22 words. Speak to your audience about what they need in an organized way they can follow, and get yourself out of the way. So make it a great day.
Thank you, Joel Weldon. Wealthy Speaker podcast listeners, if you have enjoyed this particular message, please leave us a rating, leave us a review. Let us know that you are enjoying, especially on iTunes. We are going deep on iTunes this year. And with that, we will say thanks for listening. We'll see you soon, Wealthy Speakers. Bye for now, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Wealthy Speaker Show. Please visit speakerlauncher.com for your free Wealthy Speaker audit, and visit speakerlauncher.com/podcast for show notes and many more resources to help you catapult your speaking business. See you soon, Wealthy Speakers.